And we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Toys. Because I don't have a catchy song with ukulele like Jeremy does or anything like that. And I thought I'd try to think of a good name when I was getting on with The Amazing last week. And I thought, no, it's Toys. We're going to talk about toys. And we have Mythic Customs. I'm sure a lot of people watching know him as Jeremy Gerard, Director of Sales and Marketing for Four Horsemen. He will only be that briefly in this stream. And then we're going to talk to Jeremy. Customs himself. So welcome, everybody. I hope you've had a great 4th of July. Jeremy, what was your favorite thing you ate on this 4th of July?
Dynamites.
Did you say dynamites?
I did. So you've probably never heard of dynamite because So I live in Rhode Island, and Rhode Island, like any place, has a very specific regional cuisine. But not only is Rhode Island known for certain specific dishes, I grew up in an area of northern Rhode Island named Woonsocket, and there is a sandwich that's so regional, it's only in Woonsocket. Like Rhode Islanders outside of Woonsocket, I've met many of them that have never heard of it or had one. The best way to explain it is a sloppy Joe on crack. That's literally how people say it, but it is something. Woonsocket was founded by like French Canadian immigrants who traveled to Rhode Island for the textile industry many hundreds of years ago, and this was a recipe that was very, very popular. That people make it in giant batches. You'll find it at they have bear and dynamite like fundraisers for like CYO organizations and stuff in the city. But it's basically ground beef, peppers, onions, celery, a bunch of seasoning, and then you can make it as spicy or as mild as you want by adding chili powder and red pepper flakes. It's served on a torpedo roll. While it does kind of look like a sloppy Joe, having had both of them, it doesn't taste anything like a sloppy Joe. It is very, very spicy and delicious.
Are you into the super spicy stuff? I don't think I knew that.
I'm not into super, super spicy. Like this, I do like spicy food. If I'm ordering, so for instance, at the studio, when we order Dave's Hot Chicken, which you can get that from no spice to you have to sign a waiver, I get medium. So I'm right in the middle of that. I could probably go up a notch and still be okay, but medium's my safety.
Huh. Well, mine is not as interesting. We had an event at my older sister just bought a new house, and we had an event over there, and someone they were called little brown cookies, and they were almost like all of the spices that you would smell at Christmas in a cookie, kind of like a ginger snap, but then also I don't know. I think cloves was in there, various things. Very, very good. Unexpected to have for a 4th of July, and it was delicious with the standard, bratwurst, hamburgers, and some barbecue chicken. But we have that frequently, so nothing terribly different. Well, that's good. I'm glad you had. I might have to come. I need to come to Rhode Island. That's the thing I want to do. I want to visit.
You absolutely do.
I want to go. It's the Hill, right? That's where I'm supposed to eat Italian food. Is the Hill? Is that right? Is that the right?
Yeah, Federal Hill in Rhode Island is very, very renowned for its Italian food.
Next time there is the Jeremy Con or whatever it was, last year, the year before, whenever it was, we had folks at the house. I'm going to have to make a trip.
If we go to Federal Hill to get Italian, we'll also go where I took when Chris came down. Chris from the studio came down. I took him to Federal Hill for. It's called Halato Taiyaki. So you know what taiyaki is?
I do not.
So taiyaki is a Japanese dessert. It's basically kind of like a fish-shaped pastry that's usually filled with red bean paste. They have that in Providence, but it's shaped. It's a doughy kind of cone that's shaped like a fish. Instead of being red bean paste in it, it's typically either Nutella or they have another one that's a different. But then they fill the fish's mouth is open and they fill it with soft serve ice cream and put a whole bunch of Oreos and other crazy stuff in it. It's amazing.
I want that. Yeah. So now, when you start to describe it, I know because my daughter will order that like at ramen shops.
Yes.
And I'm not a big fan of the red bean desserts. It's not my cup of tea. But with Nutella, now we're talking about something definitely my cup
like
of tea.
It's barely taiyaki, like it's in the shape-ish of taiyaki, except for the giant ice cream coming out of it. But it's amazing. It's where we go when we're being fancy. When we don't just want regular ice cream, we're going to go to the hill and get taiyaki ice cream.
You get some pretty good. I know, at least I know in Massachusetts, there's some pretty good dairy ice cream places that have dairy farms or something, and they have a little ice cream shop. Whenever I'm up there for work, people bring me to them. They've been pretty good.
Yeah, there's one in Rhode Island as well. Wright's Dairy Farm is you get
I'm about to come for a week. Apparently.
Ice cream right there. For such a small state, Rhode Island is known for its beaches and for its food.
It's only 9 states I've not been to, and that's one of them actually. So it would also I could put in the pin. Yeah, traveled so much for work, but no work. I've been all around it. I should have just swung in for dinner, but I haven't been. We'll change that.
Absolutely.
So you're in Rhode Island. You are driving to the studio. You said this week you've got a little bit of work this week to get ready for events that are coming up. One that you won't be at, that is our first event that you did actually try to make work in 2 weeks, just 2 weeks from yesterday. The 20th of July will be at Charlie's, and I've been promoting a lot of stuff this week as of you for these 2 events. That's gonna be a fun time. It'll be our first kind of we've been spoiled here in Georgia, where all of our events recently we've had the horsemen here with us. So kind of our first meetup. We've got quite a few people that have said they're going to come join, but I'm excited to see how it goes. And I think one of the things I'm pleased about is a lot of folks are vending for the first time that are have been making things for themselves and other folks, and they get an opportunity to do that for the first time. So that's something I've certainly been promoting my sister's own work. Have you seen some of the stuff that she's been putting out?
The piece that she did on Molokai with the Cinderhorn, with the fur and everything, you're right there. That's absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous.
And there's even like adornments on the loin piece. And one of the things she's been doing, so Bog Goblin is my favorite, as you know, because he looks like Rankin Bass. So she's been making him some sort of cloak that she hasn't given me a lot of preview of, but that crotch piece that is on a few that is like a black fur with the rings. She's recreated that in soft goods with black fur with the chains and the rings hanging. She's like, I just thought you might like that. So she's doing some cool stuff. Kim is I think she's probably more than a hobbyist in terms of what she sews and stuff. She makes a lot of her own clothes. She's made us clothes for gifts, especially scarves and hats and those kinds of things for many years. But she has some production things, like she and I are talking. She's talking about she can get a custom die made to like a bunch of capes and stuff. So she's going to be bringing things that the one she did without ever seeing the figure was this for Ignatius, which has like the pearlescent white and then purple on the back. It's really good. So she'll be there, but there's a lot of people that'll be there. So we have that event coming up on the 20th. And
it looks cool. I mean, it's got that very, Mythic meetup, Legions meetup type vibe. Looking, you and I were talking about it earlier this morning, and just looking at like the itinerary of the stuff you have planned. I love the fact that it's more than just come down, buy some Legions. It really feels like the kind of thing that you're going to come to and hang out with fellow fans for the day and have a number of activities.
Yeah, in fact, I was doing some I went over there yesterday. I was doing some logistical stuff with them, and we're going to have just like probably seating for 30 or 40, just tables and chairs just there the whole time. So if you want to just come in with your heads and hands or whatever you want to do, as well as some couches and some of that stuff. So they're being very generous to us over there. So it's an exciting event. So we'll see people there in 2 weeks. And then, but the one that you will be going to work on a little bit before you head out is IshCon coming out August 2nd and 3rd. So what do we need to talk about with that?
Well, we do also have, and Chris pointed out in the chat, actually next week we've got StatueCon, which is in Michigan. So that is an event. It's our first time ever doing it. One of our retailers, Collector Zone, they're kind of like a statue gallery. So they, have this event where they invite, a number of like influencers and just people over to check out the gallery, and companies like Sideshow are going to be there exhibiting. So they asked us to exhibit, and Brad and Michael from Legion's Lair, they're going to do that for us. There will be a few things for sale at that. There will be some exhibition. That's very much kind of, we don't know what to expect. So we said, yeah, you know what? We'll give it a shot. We have a couple guys that are fairly local to the store that have done a street team for us in the past. So they're going to do
Michigan
that.
Is that.
What part of? Sorry.
Yeah. What city of Michigan is that?
You know what? I'm not positive. I can look it up. Let's see.
Must be southern, right? Because Brad and those guys are.
They're about an hour away from it. So it's in St. Joseph, Michigan.
Oh. I don't think I've been there.
Yeah, it's like I said, when I reached out to them and I said, how close are you to this? They're about an hour away. So they were thrilled to spend a couple of days. And it's like a 4-day event, but those guys are going to be there on the Friday and Saturday. That's when like the main type of stuff happens. So again, not really sure what to expect there, but that should be cool. Then we've got Charlie's Collectible show the week after. And then the first weekend of August is IshCon, which a lot of news on IshCon dropped this past week. Obviously the Tusk Heavy Gunner, the schedule for the show, the fact that pretty much the whole Four Horsemen team is going to be making the trip down there. We didn't want this to feel like a replacement for PowerCon because, out of respect for IshCon and for Ish, we didn't just want this to be a placeholder for that. But obviously this is the time of year where we normally would be at PowerCon. We're not doing that this year because they're not having the show. So it just worked out great that we were able to partner with someone like Ish to be able to do this event, do the reveal of the next Cosmic Legion's Ox Crew wave, and, just hang out and meet people and have a good time.
And I see Seth's joining us. He said spacesuits. We do have the Tusk Heavy Gunner is making its debut, which you revealed, I think, Wednesday morning.
Yep.
So that's an exciting figure. I like the. I do not have it to be able to pull up, but everybody can go look at the Four Horsemen official channel. So that's an exclusive or a early release exclusive figure that then later on in the fall and September, you said, will be available as an in-stock sale.
Yeah, we'll do a sale on the website in September on Store Horseman and the Tusk Heavy Gunner. We'll have more than the Tusk Heavy Gunner up at that time, but he'll be, one of the figures that will be available at that time. It is a Four Horseman exclusive, so it is not something that's going to be part of a future wave that's going to be available for pre-order through the approved retailers. This is, think about it kind of like a Figura Obscura first drop where it's in stock. It's only through us.
And I guess similar to an extent, other than this one is announced to the Valiant Knight that was on a show first, later came as an in-stock sale, limited to
perfect example. Perfect example. The only difference, and at one point, we had actually considered not announcing it before IshCon and kind of doing what we did at Legion's Con and just dropping it on the table. But it's one of those things where, people need to plan ahead of time. As awesome as it is to have surprises, there are genuinely some people that don't like surprises because they're so meticulous in their planning and in their budgeting that the minute you drop a surprise, you throw all of their hard work out the window. So, Legion's Con is something that people are coming to. They're already planning to be there because of everything going on. They know they're going to spend a ton of money. So dropping in a surprise figure last year, I think that was a lot of fun. But for IshCon, we made the decision that, instead of surprising people, let's announce in advance, let's reveal it in advance so people know what to expect.
I think that's an interesting something we'll talk about in when we get into the meat of this conversation too. I want to talk some about mindsets about that kind of thing. You know,
Mhm.
people that plan and budget and different cons. I think that's an interesting topic. But so other things at IshCon, a lot of great folks are going to be there. If you
Absolutely.
just want to hang out, I mean, the purpose of these streams that I'm starting to do is to really look at. Really, there was so much negativity in our hobby
Mhm.
as of late, and specifically, you know, around certain items and certain things recently, that it's easy to get overtaken with that. And I wanted to kind of refocus at least the folks that watch me
Sure.
into remembering like what this actually is. Like, it's not about as cool as this is. It's not about this. It's about this.
Mhm.
And I think you know, IshCon very much feels like something that's going to be like that, where there's going to be a lot of cool stuff and cool reveals and the cosmic event. But I think there's going to be an extensive amount of in the hallway, in the lobby, in the rows, chats, conversations. That's what I'm most excited about. And I think you guys do a lot to foster that, but there's just opportunities for it too. The way that you've got the schedule kind of laid out, working with Ish, lots of things like that are going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. The Friday night, you know, even if you're not doing the Friday night VIP because it's limited to 100 people, the fact that there's going to be, you know, lobby swapping and room sales, you know, Friday night's going to be a fun night to hang out. And I mean, the show doesn't start until 10 o'clock on Saturday. So I guarantee there's going to be people bouncing around. I mean, if you've been to any show that I'm at, you know that I'm an early riser. No way I'm coming downstairs at 10 o'clock. I'm going to be probably down there much, much earlier than that, hanging out. So there's absolutely going to be opportunities to just hang out with members of the studio, members of the community, Ish and his team. It's going to be a great group of people at this thing.
And don't worry, we will have Jeremy walking around, going in rooms and lobby swapping.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We'll just go to bed early. I promise that.
Absolutely.
We just did it. We just did it a couple weeks ago.
I'm coming in on the Thursday, so I don't get a repeat of what just happened at Joe Fest, where my flight got delayed and I missed the Friday night activities. I'm coming in a day early specifically, so I'm there.
I actually am. I'm probably going to do that too. We're probably going to drive up Thursday. You know, it's with my with the shows that so many of my friends are at. I find myself keep going, well, what if I just, like Allegiance Con? Well, it starts on officially Saturday, and I'm like, what if I come in on Monday? what then? Because it's just it's so positive. You know, it's such a good time. So I hope. Oh, karaoke Thursday. I see Ish is in there. Absolutely, Ish. I'm in on that. I told you I'm in on that. So come join us. Seth's in the chat. He is in down in Southwest Florida, and he is driving up to North Carolina with the family. He's going to come to IshCon. He's got work in a different part of the state later that week, so he's pivoting his whole schedule, bringing the family to come up and hang out, and he wants to see the cosmic reveal and all that. So
and it's worth mentioning that all of these events are family friendly. You know, the Legion's lines very deliberately are family friendly. You know, I mean, these are fantasy. Yeah, people die. There's going to be battles and stuff like that, but we do not focus on the gore, and we do not focus on some of the more risque aspects of fantasy, because, you know, we've got kids of our own. You know, Eric's got a couple of little kids. He doesn't want to put something out that he would be embarrassed to show his kids, or vice versa. So we have a certain, you know, kind of a PG-13, I guess, you know, feel for the line. And any of the shows that we do, you will see lots of families there. You will see lots of kids there. While these are collector toys, they're adult collector toys, the community is very, very embracing of families. So if you're thinking of coming, do not hesitate to bring your family.
Yeah, I mean, I can add that. So last year I went to Legion's Con by myself. I was there for a while. This year I'll be there for probably around a week. And this is in the you know, I mean, is that considered the tri-state area? I think it is, right? The tri-state area, you know, not far from New York City. And all of us cannot go, but I may bring my daughter, who at that time will be 16, just with me, knowing that I'm going to be meandering about doing whatever. And I will feel completely comfortable there too with her on her own. Because I know, like, A, there's a whole bunch of people there that know me that'll help watch out for her. But B, there's not no one, you know, you're not going to encounter, she's not going to see anything she doesn't need to see. You're not going to get into that. So I can attest to that. which just makes it a fun experience. I think it makes it a fun experience, and that's a good way, because we as grown men, before Joe Fest a couple weeks ago, I had dinner with my parents, or lunch with my parents for a couple hours, and my parents have done this kind of stuff my whole life, but it's interesting. My mom said, "So, why do you think you all go do this? Why do you think this has actually happened? Because there's not a generation before you that was doing it. You haven't learned that from your dad. Your dad wasn't going to toy shows and at your age, right? He wasn't doing those kinds of things. And, I didn't know necessarily that answer. I think there's a lot to do with the way we got indoctrinated with the way targeted advertising was when we were younger and some of that stuff. Yeah. But it makes me think about, and a thing I want to talk to, folks like you, my friends, about, like, what is it? Like, how did we get here? Whereas, I would say, both of us feel positive about our careers and are blessed with good opportunities and those kinds of things. And we are choosing that our discretionary funds and our hobby time and those kinds of things are going toward an action figure community. Like, so for you, what is kind of your origin story, so to speak, for superheroes? How did you, did you start collecting recently? Well, I know the answer to that, but childhood, whatever, like, where'd this come from?
Sure. So, growing up, I was an action figure kid. I'm actually going to be 50 next year. So I was born in 1975. So I had like that golden age of original Star Wars trilogy in theaters and the original Kenner run on the line. I grew up with G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, the Transformers G1, Masters of the Universe. All of that stuff was what I played with as a kid. So very, very much into action figures growing up. There was a very brief period where I, sold all my parents got rid of all my toys. I played in a band when I was a teen, and I did that for quite a few years. But right around the time that I was turning 18, I was getting my first tattoo. And I saw some Kenner Alien figures. And this was like the Kenner Alien line, where the first 4 figures were the Scorpion Alien, Gorilla, Bull, and the Alien Queen. And I'd never seen something that detailed in a toy, much less something from an R-rated movie franchise. And I asked the tattoo artist, who just had him in the studio, I was like, those are really cool. What's that from? And when he told me, it was immediately something that I was like, I want to get those. So that line got me back into toy aisles. And that was right around the time that McFarlane's Spawn was coming out. And I'd never read the Spawn comic, but I picked up these toys and I was immediately blown away, which of course is a crazy segue into the fact that the team that was sculpting those Spawn figures that really got me to be a collector are the ones that I work with now at Four Horsemen Studios. That's insane. But that's how I started. So I was 18 years old when I started collecting. Really, Spawn was the thing that got me going. And for me at that time, and it's still today, it gave me something to look forward to, something to focus on. I had a lot of friends that were, at that age, they were partying quite a bit, drinking, doing, different substances. And this allowed me to kind of focus my attention on something that I think was a little healthier in the long run. And that's what it did for me. It gave me that sense of something to call my own, I would say.
So earlier, IshCon Karaoke, I think I heard on your Wednesday show, I watched it on pre-record, that you said you were the front man when you were in a band.
I was. So I don't say that I was the singer, because that
you do an interpretive dance in front?
No, I was. So the band that I played in, again, people who know me probably find this, yeah, that tracks. After the show would be done and you had to move all the heavy equipment, they would do all that because they didn't want to deal with anybody. But I was the one that was thrilled to go out and talk to the crowd and behind the merch table and selling stuff and hanging out and answering questions. So that was always my role. That's why I say I was the front man, because I was always the one who was front and center, kind of leading the charge.
But you were participating in the creation of it's not a Milli Vanilli
Yes,
situation.
I had a microphone, and things that would be considered singing ish came out of my mouth. Yes.
That's how long? That's just a few years in your teens, you said?
So I played with the same group of guys for a number of years. I started when I was like 14 years old. So I was like 15, 16 years old playing at 21 and over clubs at that point. But we were, a metal band, a thrash metal band, many, many years ago. The band that I played with the longest, ironically, started kind of as a joke. We were kind of playing around, just like mixing like rap music and like rock music. And this was around the time when that started becoming a genre. So we would tell people when they were like, what do you sound like? We would say, oh, it's kind of a mix of Biohazard and the Beastie Boys, because that sounded cool to us. The reality is we sounded like Limp Bizkit, which
I was going to say, was it Limp Bizkit?
Yes, it was Limp Bizkit. Yeah. Like, we wouldn't say that at the time, but being totally honest, many, many years later, yes.
Is there audio recordings that exist?
There is. There is. And I will not. George has them. George finds them very, very funny.
So it's not going to show up in a Purple Gang stream at any time.
It is not. George sent me. So around that time, yes. So William Golden said Judgment Night. Yes, it was very much like the Judgment Night soundtrack. George sent me an article recently, and not to make light of a tragedy, but the lead vocalist in the band Crazy Town, which was one of those rap rock bands, died recently. And he sent me that link, and he said, this could have been you if you didn't find toys and stayed with rap metal. So apparently I dodged a bullet there.
So we need to find the right, I don't know what it is, the right event that has some sort of goal to reach, where if the goal is exceeded, then we get an unreleased track, something like that. There probably is the right cause somewhere in the world.
We'll see.
We'll work on that. So you have a similar, to a lot of people, that in your teenage years, you kind of left your toys behind and then went and did something else. But was that out of just an interest into something else, or were you like, no, that's for little kids, I'm not into that anymore?
I think so I don't remember getting rid of the toys. Like, I remember no longer playing with the toys. So, I mean, I will fully say that I played with them probably up until I was like 13 years old, like full on having adventures. So I was in, middle school by that point. Once I started playing in the band, my interest changed, but I never looked at the toys and said, oh, that's for little kids, that's not for me anymore. And I assume my parents got rid of them in a yard sale or something. I know that they did not keep them, but it was a very short window. Cause like I said, I was 17 when I got my first tattoo, and that's when I was looking at those alien figures and went hunting out those figures. So it was only a span of a couple of years that I wasn't actively in toy aisles buying action figures.
So, similar, when I started playing sports, but I was a Ninja Turtles kid primarily. Now, a little bit younger than you, but the same era, so just you were a little bit 4 or 5 years older, but still Real American Hero, Ninja Turtles. And usually those, I mean, because, my dad's a minister. Most people know it's not a very lucrative career. So, money was always tight growing up. So things from either yard sales, flea markets, or, Turtles and G.I. Joe were pretty low cost, comparatively speaking. Never was like had a Transformer, because that was an expensive item. And then when you get that from the yard sale, it would be, it doesn't work, missing pieces. So primarily G.I. Joe and Turtles. But Turtles was my big one, and for whatever reason, I truly collected as a kid. I wouldn't open some of them. I'd keep some in the box. I'd ask for two. I'd want to do chores, mow the lawn, whatever, to try to get another. And I don't know what that comes from. I've thought about that a lot. Now, my mom is a big china in the china closet, or she in essence has a Detolf, right, with all the dishes that have never been used. And cows, she collected cow things. So I saw it, and and my dad collected eagles. I don't think I necessarily understood that's what I was doing, but I think I was mimicking some of that. Okay. And so but then I stopped. But I didn't get rid of anything. Unfortunately, my parents didn't get rid of it. So then pretty quickly, once after college and I had my own money, I have eBay. I found eBay, and my eBay account is so old. Like I don't think you can change your screen name on there or your original one. And it is named, the name of my eBay account is because there was a Beanie Baby that a girl I was dating had given me sitting on top of the computer. And that's how I could remember the name. It's this color, this animal. And it really is. I think my eBay account may be 17, 18 years old, something like that.
Mine too.
Because I was like, oh, okay, now I can get the ones I never had before that I missed. And so in my early 20s, I was getting the rest of the turtles and built up a complete collection. And at that time, I still think it was entirely because what's on the back of this box. All right, I've never seen that one. I'm going to get it. Like there wasn't a lot of, it was the Technodrome forum was my one source of information, an actual forum, right? A board. And so I had that brief period that I just didn't do it. But I don't ever really feel like I stopped, because also the things I was collecting, they were not being made anymore either.
Sure.
Like, Super 7 just came out, the 2003 Turtles that went up for pre-order. And I like the Playmate style Turtles. And somebody asked me if I was getting those. Like, I don't have any affinity to that at all. Like, I've never seen them. I don't know that property. And so I'm like, as I'm even talking, I'm like connecting dots of where that gap in time was that, but then ever since then, I've just continued to collect. So a lot of people, how long have you collected? I'm like, I don't always really, gaps, but always.
My parents were not collectors at all. And that's why it makes sense they got rid of my stuff. Is they're very practical people. Like, this is not serving a purpose. Let's get rid of it. Not even let's sell it for money. It doesn't need to be here. When I started collecting, they frankly did not understand it. Like, they were kind of mad because here I was coming home and I was bringing home toys, like lots of toys. When I first started, I was trying to get, one of every Spawn figure to have loose and one of every variant to have packaged. And this was like the crazy era of collecting where there were so many running variants, and it got out of control very quickly.
Like late 90s, mid 90s.
Yeah. It's I forget when Spawn came out, but it was like, it must have been like early to mid 90s.
Yeah, so it's the same time that the comic book industry is putting out 200 variant covers for everything. Yeah, it
was a weird. So they were mad at first. They didn't understand it. Like, they felt like I was wasting my money. Like, why are you buying these playthings? Why are you buying these toys? But I just kept doing it. It was something, like I said, that gave me a bit of a purpose and an identity. I really, really enjoyed it. At one point, I actually opened up a toy store. So myself and two friends of mine, we opened up, it was a comic/toy store, but it was really a toy store. Like, we had an account with Diamond and we did stock some comics, but we almost, because this was the point where there was lots of companies doing exclusives through Diamond. So we almost had the account just to get toys. And it was a lot of vintage stuff and a lot of new stuff. He was a big Star Wars guy. I was a big McFarlane guy. So we kind of had both of those segments of the store. But, that it kind of went from doing toy shows to doing the actual store. And actually, we closed the store right around the time when eBay started gaining popularity, because we realized that, this figure that you go to toy show after toy show, and you can never find it. And we finally hunted one down, and we have it here at our shop, and we think that's great. There's 5 of them on eBay right now.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah. That you were. Was that? Have you always been in the area you live in now, in the general Rhode Island?
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Rhode Island. The store we had was in Massachusetts. It was in Bellingham, Mass, which is a stone's throw from Rhode Island. It's right over the border. But yeah, we had a shop there, and it was like a really depressed type of plaza that had gone into bankruptcy, and new owners took it over, and they were like, hey, if you fix up your unit, we'll give you 3 months of free rent. So we did all the work on the unit. We only had the store. We had sold at toy shows for about a year prior to the store. We had the store open for about a year. And then, like I said, it just got to the point where the plaza was so dead. It didn't, years later, it's now been revitalized. But at the time, there was just no foot traffic. And it just, with the advent of eBay and stuff, it didn't make sense to have a physical location, at least that physical location. So we went our separate ways. But from that point, I mean, from the earliest times through having the store all the way to now, I've been a collector throughout.
Was that your primary income at the time?
No, that's what was kind of tough. I was working as a manager at a McDonald's at the time, and I would work at the toy store during the week. I work days at the toy store, and then go right from the toy store right to a McDonald's, and I would close at the McDonald's. So it was fairly grueling, because the idea was that, hey, we'll keep our regular jobs and just run the toy store. And hopefully, in a period of time, we'll be able to transition from our regular jobs, our normal jobs, to doing this. It just never materialized that was in the cards for us. So after a year of working 2 full-time jobs, it was like, yeah, this is not sustainable.
Did you ever, it's off topic a bit, did you ever get to go to Jeppy's Museum in Maryland before they closed that down? The Diamond. I didn't even know it was there. I was actually in Maryland to go to a Ravens game, and it's very close to their stadium. And I was like, what is that? And then I walk in this little door, and I'm like, oh, that's the first appearance of Spider-Man. Where am I at? What have I walked into? And then you realize where it is. And I think they donated a lot of that to Library of Congress or something like that. But that's cool. That's a cool place. So I think that's one thing I've thought about. It seems a lot of a measurable amount of folks do tend to try to find a way to make money in this hobby, like do it either toy shows or selling. We obviously have a big transition to talk about with you in a little while about that. But then as an adult, and I guess when I'm saying adult, I don't consider myself an adult. When I was in my 20s, I was fumbling around, didn't know what I was doing. Sure. Once you're into a career and you have a family and a home and whatever is the measure of that, did you keep going straight through? Was there, with your significant other, was there discussion, all of that, right? That, it's amazing to me that there's so many of us that have rooms that look some version of this. And it's not 15 years ago that there was a whole movie mocking a guy putting Hot Toys in a detolf. Like that was what was happening in 40-Year-Old Virgin. That's what it was.
Absolutely.
And now you don't have to hide this hobby. I don't think. I don't feel like I do. And I work in a big corporate America. I don't have to hide it. So, as an adult, what was that journey like?
So my wife, when we started dating, I was a collector, and, our dates used to consist of going to Toys R Us and KB Toys and hunting. So she's been supportive of it ever since. I mean, to the point that, like, when I see posts in like the different groups about like, how do I hide this from my wife, or my wife would never let me do that. Like it actually makes me sad. Yeah. And I get why people may sometimes be like that. Sometimes people make bad decisions with their finances and their collecting hobby. That's a reality. Early on for me, I decided that I wasn't going to spend bill money on toys. So part of me starting to sell toys, it started at the time where there were chase figures and there were figures that were one per case. And if I found one, I would buy that figure. So when I went to a toy show, I used to go to toy shows with boxes of toys in the car. And when I would go up to a table that I saw something I wanted, I would say, "Are you doing any trading?" And if they said, "What do you got?" I would show them my list and I would do a trade with them. And I would trade the stuff that was in my car for the stuff that was on their table. Call that a scalper, whatever. But that's how I got a lot of the stuff I needed for my collection without, overpaying for it. So early on, there was a point where the collection started to feed itself. Money that I needed for the collection was typically raised from selling other things that were in the collection. But then there was that period of time where my wife and I got married, and we were only married for a year and a half, and we had our son, and we were a family of 3, and then eventually a family of 4 when my daughter came along a couple years later, living on a single income, so just myself. And there were periods of time where I can tell you that I sold toys to pay our bills. Like, there were points where I said, "Okay, you know what? I really love this stuff, but it's worth a bunch of money, and we have things that we have to pay for." So it's no stretch to say that there were points where selling toys put food on our table. And, my wife's never forgotten that. She actually feels bad sometimes that I sold that stuff. In the reality, there have been things that I've sold throughout my life. I'm sad when it leaves, and then within a couple of days, I forget I even had it. Like, the toy collection has been so transitional since it started that I have very little attachment to the stuff once it's actually gone. But because of that, I think we have a really healthy relationship in terms of, this is my thing, this is what I do. And she's incredibly supportive, even before it quite literally became my job and became my career. Even before that point, which is just, in the last few years, she was incredibly supportive of it. But I do think that part of that is I've always tried to make responsible decisions when it comes to what I am buying.
Yeah, it's one of the focuses of these streams would be to kind of help folks that do struggle, because it is. I mean, it's the reality, and I think, even though it is Jeremy's actual job to sell us toys, he's also a real person that understands budgets, and everybody's not everybody is going to buy 4 all-ins of whatever it is, because they're going to want, and some people will, because that's what they do. But I think that's a good, I've heard you use that a few times. You've never used bill money to buy toys. Now, does that mean for you, it is always coming from selling something to bring something else in, or is it you're budgeting an amount of money for the toys?
It's all, for many, many years, it's been either through selling toys or side hustles. Like, there have been times where I've done side work and used some of that money to pay for some of the toys, even if it's not all of the side hustle money, but it's not money that's earmarked as part of our budget. When we make a family budget, collectibles are not on that family budget. That's something that's separate that I take care of.
And so that's, depending on the person's situation, that's, if you have that way, whether to, so, some people haven't never collected, so they're starting from nothing. They have no way to generate it. I think the most important thing is to carve out a way that you're going to fund it that doesn't disrupt anything else, however 100%. That's defined in your home. And, for some people that can be bigger than some, and for some people that's smaller than some. And I just always find it helpful in all of my budgeting, just generally, right, is to do it in like things that don't have fixed amounts. So like your mortgage has an amount, that's what it is. But things that, like eating out or going to conventions, it's just, all right, X percentage, whatever that number is of what I make, is going to go into that category. And I've kept that the same for 15 years. And as I, have opportunities to make more money, then those categories grow. But it's the same percentage I've ever spent on it. And what was once one Marvel Legend now can be one all in, right? Maybe, but that's how you find you don't get yourself in trouble. But I also, it is not easy. I do recognize it's not easy for me that if you say, I don't have enough right now, especially San Diego Comic-Con, depending on what you collect, so much shows up all at once. And a lot of it does have the FOMO. This is exclusive. This is hard to get, etc. You got to buy it now. You know, we several items that will keep going up over the next couple weeks. You just have to be able to say no if it's not in the budget, and that's not easy. I don't know. So you were jumping ahead a little bit, but do you have any? You know, what all do you collect as an adult? Because I think people think you only collect Legions. That's not true.
No, it's not.
A lot of stuff.
So a lot of the stuff. So I do collect Legions. Obviously, every Legions figure that comes out, I get multiples of. I collect Mezco Rumble Society. So I don't tend to collect the Mezco licensed stuff. I think it's all wonderful, but the Rumble stuff, the original IP, I tend to like that the most. I will get occasional NECA stuff. Like I've loved the NECA Dungeons and Dragons line that hits the nostalgia bone for me. I've picked up a bunch of their Turtles comic book, style figures. So I get those. Lately, when I go to toy shows, and W and I were walking around together at Joe Fest, I've been actually hunting down weird vintage stuff that I remember from my childhood. So that's kind of been fun to hunt down, because that sense of the actual hunt is something that's tougher to get in the toy collecting world today, where everything is available online as a pre-order. So I've really enjoyed doing that. Classified figures that I remembered those Joes as a kid, I've been buying those. And then Glyos behind me, I've got the guys at the studio got me onto the Glyos train, so I've been buying a bunch of those as well.
You're all over the place.
It's pretty diverse. Yep. It's not cheap. That stuff comes out. I mean, a Glyos drop happens, and I'll drop a couple $100 on a Glyos drop. So it's certainly not inexpensive things to buy. I'm not a completist, so I am totally, and I think that's, if I'm giving people collecting advice,
don't be
try hard. Two pieces I would say is don't necessarily be a completist. If you don't like a toy and you're buying it to check a box off, you're doing something wrong. Like, buy toys you like. And number two, I remember years ago when I started hiking, somebody told me, hike your own hike. Like, don't pace yourself based on somebody else, how fast they're going. When you see that person, rush by you and then rush back down, before you're at the top, don't feel bad that they outpaced you. Hike your own hike. I think that applies to collecting as well. Don't go on the groups and say, well, look at these displays. Mine's not as cool. Or, people post what they're getting from the new pre-order, and you're like, well, I could only afford 2. There's nothing to be ashamed of for that. Collect the way that it makes you happy, get the things you want, and don't feel like you have to overextend yourself to, be able to post that on some group and say, oh, look, I got an all-in too. Dude, all-ins are great. And I have a financial reason why I want you to buy all-ins. But when someone posts that, hey, I was only able to afford this one figure at this time, I'm genuinely thrilled that they had that little available discretionary and they still chose to spend it with us. I never look at that and say, oh, that's only one figure. Pff, not at all. So hike your own hike.
Yeah, it's great advice. And, it's not, and I can speak 100% from me. It is not, I struggle with being a completist, and I know that. And that's a question I wonder if it really, you've got the whole great 80s toy thing, and then Congress doesn't allow certain thing. And I truly wonder, was there a level of my brain that now says I need to have it all, because I can't finish the checklist on the back if I don't have it all. So it's almost like you said, that sometimes, I mean, there's even times as I got the few pieces from Mythic Legions out. For instance, the Silver Knight Legion builder. Right? That was more than I wanted to pay to get that figure. And it got in, I'm like, this figure really is not very good compared to what, like, everything I've been buying recently.
Yeah.
but when I put it on the shelf and it completed that faction, I was like, yeah,
that's cool.
But I recognize that about myself. So if not everybody can just say no.
Sure.
So you have to. I have very specific rules, and we talked about it recently with the Mondo He-Man stuff. That stuff's incredible, and you didn't mention that. You've gone back deep into that pretty quickly.
I did.
Up and down the hill.
I forgot about that because that was hot and heavy. That was like I had my eye on it. I used to have a merman, and it was really cool, but I was like, I'm not going to get the rest. And I actually sold the stupid merman, and then got bitten by it because somebody in the Cabal gave me a great deal on the Skeletor and the Panther. And as soon as I had them in, I was like, oh no, I need them. I went back and bought the merman again.
Right. So I had, I used to have, I talked about this with D Amazing last week when I sold so much of my collection 4 years ago, and I had I was almost complete on the Hot Toys MMS. That's such an absurd statement to make.
Yep.
I know this. And, but at the time I had the He-Man and Skeletor right when they had come out in like 18, 19, somewhere around there. And so I was selling almost all my 6-scale stuff. Those went. The Batman, the animated series went. Not because I didn't like them, but because it was like, hey, I got to get this out of here. If it's not fantasy, it's not Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, 6-scale, I'm not doing it. So they go. And perfectly fine now. And then at PowerCon last year, I saw that their display was incredible.
It was great.
And I'm like, oh. And even now, if you come to see us on the 20th at Charlie's, if you spend $800 at Ginger Kid's booth, he will give you a free Mondo He-Man. That's a several $100 figure. Yeah. You will get included with. I can't believe that's what he's doing, but that's what he's decided to do. He wants to do something for the community. And in my mind, I'm like, all right, that's what I'm going to do, because I'm going to load up on Cosmic Legions, and I'm telling myself, you cannot do that, because if you get it, you are not capable of saying, I just have the He-Man. You're going to go buy all of them. You're going to go back and get all of them. And so for myself, knowing I struggle with that, whether it's budgetary, whatever the case is, I just have to say, no, I can't collect that line. I just can't do that line anymore. You got rid of your Marvel Legends because you used to just
not yet.
A year ago. Yet. Oh, not yet.
No. So I used to have both a comic collection of Legends and an MCU collection. And I got to the point where I said, okay, I don't have the display space to display them both. It was actually more a display space situation. So I got rid of the comic versions because this was the period, this was pre-Endgame. So this was the period where I was really, really enjoying MCU. So I kept the MCU collection as well as characters that didn't have an MCU representative yet. So I still have all of like the X-Men figures that are their comic versions and Fantastic Four, but everybody else, the Avengers type crew, those are all MCU. So I still have those today, but even that, I told myself I'm stopping after Endgame. Like once Endgame is done and I've got that build out, I'm not getting any more. So, Eternals and Shang-Chi and everything that's come out since, those figures I have not purchased. I do think they're the next things to go, again, purely for space reasons, because it's a very large display of figures. So once I get to the point that I need more shelf space, that's probably the next thing to be sacrificed. It's either that or Transformers Masterpiece.
Two things in there. So it's a fascinating thing that I think I even remember saying this at Endgame. Oh, Disney just gave all of us completists a jumping off point. They just gave us a very clean, I'm done. I don't have to buy any more of these, which I did the same thing. I just stopped. Like I was buying all the SH figure arts and I said, no, okay, I'm good. But the space is another way you can help yourself have barriers, right? Mm-hmm. I am not good about that. I had my own home, and at the time I was single, and I'm like, all right, well now the guest room is toy room number 2. You've been here, you've seen this, and now fortunately a lot of it is impressive family stuff, right? It's not just there's a lot of my stuff all over the place, but it's it's a family thing. And I'm trying even every day, like I've been doing a lot of organizational videos to pull it back and reclaim space. Not because it matters, not because I care. I invite people over to look at it, but because I need to put a fence to say, okay, just because you can doesn't mean you necessarily should.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you're in a position where you've got, your career, you have a successful career, so your income allows you to collect at a certain level. When I said don't be a completist, if you've got the financial ability to be a completist and you've got the space to be a completist, by all means, be a completist. I love this hobby. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my disposable income for all of the hobbies or things that you can do, this is where I spend my time. This is where I spend my money, and it gives me incredible amounts of joy. So I'm happy to spend that money. My advice is just spend within your means, collect within your means.
Yeah. You don't try as hard as you can to not be financing your action figure purchases with interest rates, whatever it looks like for you. Try, again, everybody's not in the same position, but, try what you can. And I think now, I mean, we can speak about Horseman, but there's the true elusive exclusive that you have one chance only to buy it is not what it was 3 or 4 years ago. Most companies recognize we need to make this available with a couple times with maybe some version changes, some minor edits, whatever, but they want to get it into customers' hands. That's so I think that's really good advice. So let's talk about that, because that's, I think, you are unique in that you're very similar to a lot of us, to everybody watching. I see a lot of people talking about the fire sale that have been on the channel. So you probably have no real knowledge of that. 4 straight days on a Facebook group, myself and Josh, like 7 or 8 hours every day. This is actually the very first time. This is a lot of people don't know this. I don't think you know this. So this is the week I met Natalie. Natalie was a kickboxing instructor at the time. I was working. I still kickbox, but I met her there. And that same week, Joshua came into town. I had decided, this is right at the end of 2020. And, once you get isolated from everybody for a few months, you just, what am I doing here? And at that time, the big bad toy store boxes didn't stop coming. So they're just piling up and piling up. You're like, oh my goodness, what have I done? And then you have extra money, and like we all did, and maybe you're buying. But I haven't seen a human in 40 days. I'm like, what am I doing? So I decided to sell. And like you say, you fund this isn't playing, not that anything's wrong with any of this stuff. It's not sitting at the bar with your discretionary money. It's not golfing with your discretionary money. It's not fixing up an old car. That may not be the best example, but those are all things that you use your discretionary money on it. You have a good time. You hang out with your buddies. Same thing as this, but you don't have anything at the end. Like, you don't have an asset at the end of it. And in our hobby, we do. We actually have things that often appreciate in value. And, you mentioned the term scalper. There's, if you own a thing and it appreciates in value and you sell it later for a greater value, that's what the United States dollar does. None of us are selling the dollar for what it was worth 15 years ago. So same thing, but 4 straight days. And it was, with that, I paid off my parents' home. I paid off my car. I mean, it was when we are not on camera, I will tell you, it was a sizable number. That was in the hot time of Mezco, where Mezco, they were 4 figures for almost every Mezco exclusive. It was significant. Yeah. But I was so delirious. And it was basically Whatnot before Whatnot. Yeah. And we were trying to combine people shipping and all this. So my house, which you've been in, every space of carpet, there's piles of stuff. Yeah. And Natalie, wants to meet. David, my friend David's here, Josh there. She wants to come over and see the house and meet us. So she walks in, and this is the first time everybody's met her, to us trying to figure out how we're going to pack 400 people's things in my home in dismay. And I'm just, I had started to use the driveway, and then it starts raining, and I'm like, I'm throwing my hands up with it. And then she just zipped right in and got everything organized and got us on track. I'm like, okay, she's the right person, because if you're walking into that and you're not just getting in your car and leaving, but it was quite. Not only was she not like turned away, but she, jumped right into the fray and helped organize it. Yeah, that's awesome. Yes. But so that's a little off topic. But so for you, you actually successfully have transitioned to where it is your job, and not just at not to minimize this, but not just selling at a show or like it's your job. Yeah. And amazingly enough, with the people that kind of re-engaged your passion in the hobby without you necessarily realizing that. So how has that, was 20, you're celebrating how many years with the studio now, right now?
So I started with the studio part-time right after GCon 2019. So GCon 2019, which that's when GCon was still in the summer. So I went there. I had gone to GCon 2018. I came back for 2019. And the origin story for that was I was, the first guest that came in. Jim was the only one there. And we got to talking, and I had said something about traveling for work, and he said, "What is it that you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm in website design and digital marketing." He was like, "Why aren't you helping us with our, website?" Which at the time, if you remember the website, the Four Horsemen website before the one they have now, those of us who were on the old Four Horsemen message boards recall that very fondly. But other than that, the website was just bereft of information. So I never wanted to be that guy and kind of say, "Hey, you should hire me to fix this for you."
Sure.
But I told him that, and he said, "No, we really do need help." So it was right after that we started talking about what that would look like. And then I did the website, and I said to them, "Look, I can rebuild the website for you and post it. That's fine. But it's going to just be outdated if you don't have someone who's constantly keeping it updated. So I would like to work for you part-time doing that." And they loved that idea. And I very quickly became kind of like the studio historian, to the point that if they had a question, they would say, "Go check the website or message Jeremy." Because I knew all this stuff, and they appreciated the fact that I approached it from the perspective of a fan, because I was a fan, but I also had, a mind for all of this stuff. So that was, like I said, summer of 2019. I officially started working full-time for them in March of 2022. So that was the point. It was at Legions Con 2021 that we started talking about what a full-time employment would look like. Right after the new year, we agreed on that. But I left a job that I was at for 14 years, where I was, the only person at that job I reported to was the owner of the company. I left that to come here. So I gave them a couple months notice before I went and left and started working full time at the beginning of March 2022.
That's so the website, I will comment. I don't point people to it in the workplace necessarily, but I think about it because we do. Are you familiar with the term a center of excellence in the business world, right?
Yep.
So I think what you have done on the website is actually very much like a Four Horsemen center of excellence, because it is a repository of all the various things you need, but also the same information is organized in different ways depending on how you might be going to look for it. Some people want to go right to the checklist. Other people want to go to the waves released. Other people go to the faction. It's all going to the same ultimate destination. Totally. And I think you've done a really good job of translating that. So I've meant to tell you that, there are times where we're doing some of this for some various automation stuff, and I'm like, we have to make the information easy to access no matter who you are, not the way I want to see it, but the way anyone may want to see it. No. So I think you've transitioned good. But so I think about your path of Fred Durst to the toy shows and McDonald's to then, I guess if you were there 14 years, pretty quickly you were into what your other career was, and then to the studio. So that's in that journey, was there ever a time you're like, I hope to get into the toy world? I want that to be my job.
So not after I closed the toy store. When I closed, because that was there was a point that I wanted to be a toy seller. That's what I wanted to do. Because my favorite thing about the toy store was talking to people. When people would come in and, a new Star Wars, this was Star Wars, the new Power of the Force type figures. That's when that was hot and heavy. So we had a lot of that. So people would come in after a new wave had dropped and just being able to talk to them about those figures. Oh my goodness, did you think they'd ever do that character? That was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed that. But once that ended, it was almost right on the tail end of that ending that I went back to school. And this was 1998 that I went back to school, because there was this new thing called the internet. And I was actually going to go to school for computer repair, because I was just like, look, I had met my future wife. I knew I wanted to provide a life for us that I couldn't being a manager at McDonald's. So I said, I'm going to do something with computers. So I went to what's essentially a trade school here in Rhode Island, New England Institute of Technology. And I said, I want to come for computer repair. And they looked at my transcripts and they said, well, you're in all these art, like you got all this advanced art stuff that you used to do in high school. Because this was a couple years out of high school, by the way. They said, we've got this program called website design. Do you want to try that out? And I was like, whatever. I just want to make money. So I started doing that and immediately knew that's where I belonged, to the point that I was halfway through my degree and the school hired me to student teach what I was going to school for. So I was actually student teaching website design at the school I was going to learn website design for. I really just took to it very, very quickly. Once I started doing that, that kind of became my career. And the toys were always a collecting hobby, but I had no aspirations that I wanted to do this as a job. Even to the point that when I started working for the studio, I had done freelance work for many, many years. I really viewed it as a freelance job. Even my ongoing work for them, it was very much like, hey, this is just nice, regular freelance income that's coming in for me managing the website and writing new content. And where it started to change was with the store. I had rebuilt the website, but not the store. And I had told them, look, I don't have a lot of experience with e-commerce, so I don't want to touch your store. But the old Four Horsemen store was horrible. Like, it was, if you hear about the old stories on the old store, it was so bad. There was one point that a sale crashed it so badly that they couldn't find the store. Like, they called the company and they said, our site is down, our store is down. And they said, we can't even find a record of your store in our database. I don't know how that happens, but it was chaos. So when they asked me to rebuild the store, it really became like I was doing a lot more consulting for them. And that's when I started taking on a lot more responsibilities. And that just increased and increased and increased to the point that, like I said, we finally said, like, hey, I can't keep working two jobs. Like, I still had my full-time job and I'm doing more and more work every single month for the studio. I can't keep this up forever. And for us to take this to the next level, I need to invest more time. So that's where we had that discussion of like, hey, and that was really the point at that Legions Con 2021 where we started having these conversations that I said, you know what, maybe this is feasible. Like, maybe I could work full time at the studio. The line had grown to the point that they were looking to expand the team, because for years, Four Horsemen Studios was like just, you know, Eric, Jim, Cornboy, Sherry, and then a bunch of, I mean, there were a couple people that were in the mix throughout the years, and then a lot of people that worked kind of freelance. You know, at the time, Chris was doing project manager, but he was a freelancer. I was a freelance marketing person. Nate was a freelance artist. So all of us were working just part-time. And that was the point that it really was like, hey, I think I could actually do this.
So with that, how has that changed the way you participate in the hobby, with it being now, you know, you spend the majority of your day, you know, of your waking hours at least, with the hobby being work too. You know, you hear a lot of people say, don't turn your hobby into your work, because then you won't like your hobby anymore, or versions of that. How does that work for you? You know, it certainly, you know, we all believe, at least have an understanding that it feels like that the horsemen themselves are great leaders, great people to work for. you
Sure.
know, but there's, I'm sure there's still ups and downs like everything else. And you being, you know, very front facing and very active, you get the joys of comment sections and those kinds of things as well.
Sure.
Has it, you know, what have you had to do to make sure you still enjoy it?
So, I mean, couple points there. Everyone at the studio is amazing. Like, everyone at the studio is so on the same, they're on the same team. And it's funny, the place I used to work, the owner always used to say, you know, when you work somewhere and they're like, oh, we're a family. He always used to say, no, I hate that. Families are dysfunctional. Families will stop talking to each other for a decade because someone brought the wrong dessert to Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
We are not a family. We are a team. The way a team succeeds is when everyone props everybody else up. When the star players help that lowest performing player, because everybody needs to be performing for the team to succeed. So I always think about that. And whether or not Four Horsemen is a family or a team, whatever, it is a very supportive group of people that throughout all of the dramas that we deal with, because you said it earlier, amazingly, the toy collecting world can be full of drama.
Yeah.
We are all there to support each other. So that has been very helpful, because without a doubt, the toughest part of my job is the comment sections. You know, I see people all the time say things. We are so much more in front of our community than I think is typical of a lot of other fandoms. You know, there's a lot of companies, whether you're talking toy companies, whether you're talking authors, musicians, whatever, where I don't think they are as inside that community as our company is with our fan base. So when we see some of those negative comments, and there's a very difference between someone saying, yeah, I don't care for this, and someone being downright hurtful. That type of stuff is hard to read, because part of you wants to fight it. Part of you wants to refute it and say, like, well, okay, what you're saying, did you consider this and did you consider that? Or it's tough. It is hard. I try to debunk when people are just patently false about things, but when it's an opinion or just a hurtful comment, I can't comment on every one of those. So for my own sanity, I've tried to minimize how much I engage with stuff like that. There are points every night at a certain point, my phone literally gets put down and I leave it. And I don't, because I, like many of us, am tethered to my phone, and I constantly feel like I need to check it and stuff, and I need to make sure I know what's going on. So for my own sanity, including on weekends, a lot of times I have to physically distance myself from the kind of community, which is tough sometimes because it's a hobby. So many of the people in the hobby do it on the weekends. So there's a lot of times where I'm like, well, I've been doing it all week. The weekend is where I need to sometimes step away.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, because we didn't want to get too much into sales hat, but I specifically wanted to talk about that because of that point. Because I think what is relatable for those of us that don't, you know, our comment section is not making money for our company, but there is the element of, man, this really feels negative today, or you know, why is my happy little Facebook group filled with so many fill in the blanks? And you can't escape. It is the double-edged sword of this hobby. Is it's become a great community. The internet has made it boost even more so. Most people in this chat, the only reason that any of us have ever met each other or talked to each other is because of the same thing that does also bring the negativity. Is we have a place to share that. And so you do have to find a way. And I think that's a good point every night all right, I put it away. I put the phone down. For me, I've got separate accounts. I log out of the account that's in the toy groups. And so that, you know, if that way I can just see my cousin's kids and, you know, whatever, those kinds of things. But I also, too, I have whatever the mode is on my phone that, you know, at a certain time it comes on and those apps aren't visible anymore, too. You can do all kinds of things. Fortunately,
Sure.
I think the technology and social media companies have realized that it's a slippery slope to where, we just heard the Surgeon General is making the recommendation to Congress to put the warning sticker on social media apps. That's on cigarettes. That's because they know, okay, we've got to give people a way to regulate themselves because it's hard. I think we talked about this some last week. The greatest minds in the world work for these companies to get you to swipe to the next photo.
Sure.
Like they're smarter than us at that.
They're
not going to resist it. So we have to break away from it sometimes. So it's a challenge. I know it's a challenge. But
for me, the toughest stuff, like when I think about the comments, again, like so back, like take the Poxus wave. When the Poxus wave started shipping, there was an unfortunate amount of breaks on the Thrace figure, right? And we talked about this at length. Based on percentages of how many shipped versus how many breaks we had, it was still a very, very small percentage, but it was a significantly larger percentage than we typically see with our figures. That is something that we absolutely addressed, and we took care of that. It took us a while to fix some of them because we literally had to get more Thrace legs made and sent to us from the factory because it was more than we had ever seen for a figure. What bummed me out for something like that was when you see people posting, comments about it and then people piling on. Look, the reality is there are people in any community that like to see the world burn. There are people that are drawn like a moth to the flame when it comes to the drama. And there are also people that are new to the community. So when they see something like this, as atypical as it was, and they started saying things like, I'm terrified to open my toys. Yeah. Like, for me, that sucks because you're like, dude, open your toys. Yeah. Don't not do something because you're afraid it's going to break. Because guess what? If it breaks, we'll take care of you. We will fix the problem, but don't not enjoy something because you're afraid there's going to be a problem. At the time I had said, it's like if you hear that someone got sick after eating at a restaurant and you're like, well, I'm never going to that restaurant, right. Regardless of the fact that tons of other people have told you that they had a great meal there. That's silly. You don't have to do it. And that analogy, I mean, if you actually do go and get sick, you're going to get sick. There's nothing they can do to fix that. At least in our case, we can easily just send you another leg and you're good to know.
Yeah. And that's, unfortunately the positivity or hey, my figure broke and I got my new arm in. This doesn't get posted about at all. Like it's not, or it doesn't get the same attention, right? Because also same thing. The social media companies know what gets the eyeballs, and sometimes it might be a skeptical mind, but you go, the negative ones sure do seem to get more traction than the positive one. But let's end with the Mythic Customs hat, because that's where I think is also really interesting, because you talked about when you were a kid, you played with your toys up until whatever age, and I think those of us that are doing various things, whether it be very, pop and swaps or your term, the lazy boy customs, or well into some of the things that yourself and others are doing. I think that's playing with their toys. I think what The Amazing does is playing with their toys. Like this hobby has created a new way to invite my buddy over and sit on the ground and make our guys fight each other. Right. And and in your case, it's through the customization of stuff and the story. Like right now you're telling your Shogun story with the figures that you're creating. Last year it was your tribute story. So talk some about that. Like what kind of outlet is that for you? And, I think that's very interesting to me.
So prior to Legions, I hadn't done a lot of toy customizing. I did some. There was a line that Hasbro did years ago called Zevos that I did a bunch of customizing with. Before that, the G.I. Joe Sigma 6 line, which a lot of people hated, but I actually dug that line. And those figures you could pop, boil and pop things apart and switch them around. So I had done some with that as well, but nowhere near what I've done with Legions. So for me, it wasn't only when I first got the Legions Wave 1 in, it wasn't only playing with the figures, it was also a creative outlet. You know, again, I am a creative type of person. And for so many years, my job as a web designer, while it was creative, I used to, when I used to teach web design, I would tell people, like, look, this is commercial design. It's not art. This is not creative expression. You can be creative, but you have a job that you have to do. Like, you know, if you get hired by a law firm, there's only so much creativity that you can do on that website before it starts getting really weird and inappropriate. It still has to look like a law firm. It still has to convey their message. So I did that for years, and I worked with a lot of really, really boring, great clients, but boring subject matter.
Yes.
So Legions allowed me to be creative in a way that I wasn't getting otherwise. And that is really what started Mythic Customs for me. There was a point where I challenged myself when I got onto Instagram, and this is a number of years ago, that I wanted to post something new every single day. And while it wasn't a new custom every single day, I did it for 2 solid years before I stopped. 2 solid years, I posted 7 days a week. Of that time, I would say 95% of it was probably a new custom or an update on a custom I had shown previously. There were not a lot of repeat type stuff. And it was very much, and this was obviously early days. This was before the rise of 3D printing and all that. This is when we were buying, like, you know, loose Motu Classics heads, dremeling them out and using those. This was pure pop and swaps or painting existing Legions, you know, parts and stuff. But it was such an exciting time because there weren't as many people doing it. As much as I love the community of customizers today, that was a point where everything was new, everything was fresh. There were so many ideas that had yet to be explored. Early on, a lot of what I did in Mythic Legions customizing was just tapping into my love of Dungeons and Dragons and other types of character classes that hadn't been represented yet. Monks, right? So we're getting a monk figure at Legions Con this year. That was very much inspired, thinking wise, by monks that I did 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, customs that I did so I could get a monk in my collection. Now that we have the parts that we didn't back then, part of my, you know, motivation was I want everybody to be able to have a Mythic Legions monk in their collection. So that's how it started for me. And it's ironically how I got noticed, because that first time that I went to the studio for Intern for a Day as a guest, as a fan, they knew who I was. They had seen my custom work. They appreciated it. They thanked me. And because of the custom work is why they invited me back a month later to be part of the G-Con broadcast. And I mean, that really started the trajectory that I find myself on now. So I still customize now. I posted a figure today. You mentioned my Mythic Shoguns. You know, what I've done the last few years at Legions Con is treated my custom display as a bit of an exhibit. Last year was all tribute customs. This year is Mythic Shogun. So it's a reimagining of the realm of mythos as if it was set in like a fantasy feudal Japan. So it keeps me doing creative stuff. I will tell you that there are certain things I don't do because they get into the line, which is insane, by the way. The fact that I literally limit my custom work because some of these ideas make their way into the line is, I still pinch myself to be aware that that's real.
How many, so like right now, for instance, how many different custom projects are you working on at the same time? Or are you one beginning to end and then the next?
Good question. Now I'm one. For years I wasn't. For years I probably had 5 or 6 at any given period. I had a bunch on the table, and that's why I was able to keep up that pace, because I was always doing a little something. And I would paint a little bit over here. Like I would have 6 customs And if I was using black, I would paint the black on all 6 of them. There's 6 totally distinct customs, but I would bang that all out. I was incredibly efficient. Back in the early days of Wolf King Custom, a lot of the painted parts that Wolf King offered early on, especially all the critter parts, I batch painted all of that stuff. I mean, I have pictures where I would be painting so many fox heads, just one after another, just like assembly line batch painting them. I haven't done that in years. It really helped me sharpen my skills. I haven't done that in years, but now because of my time constraints, I tend to do one custom at a time. I do, however, there are times where I will just play. There are times where on a Sunday afternoon, I'll have time and I just start digging into parts bins and create something that was not intentional. I did not plan it out. It just purely comes out of having fun. And some of those are my favorite pieces.
So when you posted, I don't remember you having done this recently, but when everybody was posting how many of the recent wave they were getting, you actually did that and said, here's why I'm getting this many of this. And here are the things I have in mind. I thought that was interesting. And maybe you have posted that and I just didn't notice it before, but that was interesting to me because it maybe, a glimpse into the way you create. And is that often what happens is what comes to it's a chicken and egg? Is it the idea I want to make a X, or is it that head I'm going to be able to now do something like it? Which way does the inspiration come?
It's both. So like with that wave, and the reason I posted that is because a number of people ask me, they're like, hey, people do. I'm very aware that people view my content and, my leadership, not just as you mentioned, the sales and marketing hat, but as a fellow fan and customizer. They're like, what are you thinking? Because I like the way you think. I like what you do. So I kind of want some of that feedback and everything. So maybe you may be thinking about something in a way I'm not, that I should, get more of this or less of this or whatever. So that's why I posted that, because people were genuinely asking. But sometimes I know there are certain customs I want to do. So I'm like, I'm going to need more of these pieces. Other times I just look at something like Hypatia and I'm like, that is such a great base body. That is going to be so useful. I want to have a couple of those just stashed away for a rainy day when I have a project that I want to work on. So I will do both of them and I will base my orders on that. Of course, I also do have the ability to get extras. If I say, oh goodness, now I have this great idea, I need an extra one of those, I do have the ability, because of my job, to get some more at the studio. But I do try to plan out what I'm going to want up front, because just like I've been saying, we're still, despite all of this growth and all this success, we're still a tiny company, right? This model, this pre-order model that allows us not to guess at how many we need and either totally under order because we're trying to be a little risk averse, or totally over order and end up with a bunch of stock in our warehouse that impacts our standing as a company. The pre-order model works for us, but it only works when people actually place pre-orders, when people follow that model and pre-order up front, so we know what to order, we know what the demand is. So even as someone that works there that could just get this once they come in, I do still place pre-orders. I do account for all of that, so we know what actually makes sense to order.
Yeah, you mentioned the small company. It dawned on me. It's Natalie and I were talking, and kind of similar to your tradition. She's asked me like, do you think you'd ever want to work in the toy industry? Mm-hmm. And it's just not like. I just think once you get to your career, you don't really think about changing industries necessarily. Sure. Like if an opportunity presents itself, you chase it, right? But
sure.
And I was thinking about Four Horsemen. I'm like, I don't know exactly how many employees they have, but it's less than like 25. I think. It's way less. I think
it's like maybe 12 or 13. I mean, you can look at the back of the package and literally see all of us. Like that is literally all of us on the back of the package. And I mean, Trevor and CJ, they're not full time. They're both, contract workers for us. but everybody else on the back of the package. There are a handful of people that work in the warehouse. There's a couple people, so Cookie's on the package. There's a couple people that are full-time back there. I think besides Cookie, there's one other full-timer, and everybody else is part-time as needed. But it is a small group. It is, I mean, what, maybe 12, 14 people total?
And that's, so in my role, between direct and indirect reports, I have over 1,000 employees all over the world, truly. Yeah. And so I think I'm like, would I consider that one day? Well, sure, if the right opportunity presented itself. Sure. But I may employ more people than work in most elements of the toy industry in total. Yep. So it's not like it's just it's not a huge market. I think we forget that we are a very niche thing in a very niche thing. Like, and it's not, so it's as big as it feels like our community is. Most people don't have any idea. And I think that's interesting in your job. This is probably not information you would ever disclose necessarily, but I'm like, there's a bunch of people in the cabal, but also there's people plus X that aren't on Facebook or in the friends group or anything. And you got to make sure that they get all the information that they need as well, because they're not ever going to be popping and swapping or even know. They just see it. Oh, cool. Knight. I'll get a Knight. That looks cool. I thought it was interesting because in the reveal you talked about Kaipacha. That's how I pronounce that, right? Kaipacha. And you specifically said this is like a D&D rogue figure. And so when I was showing things to my sister, and then she sends me this message, I want this one. It looks like it would be the rogue character in my D&D campaign. I'm like, okay, well, you accurately hit that one because she doesn't know anything about the line. And that was immediately what she did. And I think that's interesting that path.
Something you just mentioned about the cabal, it's true, because being a member of the cabal, an active member of the cabal, sometimes there's an impression out there that the cabal is the Legion's community. The cabal is the most active part of the Legion's community, but it is not everything. It's a percentage of the Legion's community. It also is a percentage that skews really heavy in terms of customizing and stuff like that. There's a lot of, because that's something we think about. There's a lot of other people out there that they're not in the cabal. That's not, they don't pop and swap. They don't customize. They approach this from a very, very different angle. So, even like I posted something on the cabal recently where some of the feedback on As a Spirit Bender, where people were saying like, oh, I wish they would have given her a different second head instead of Thrace. And I had said, out of curiosity, if the option was no second head or that one, what would you prefer? Because we all would prefer a brand new head. That's without a doubt, that's the preference. But if that brand new head doesn't exist, we will often throw in an extra head like we did with Azza that may not be a perfect inclusion, but it looks really, really cool and it adds value. And, we always think about the fact that when people are like, well, I already have Thrace and I already have Callian. Well, what about someone that doesn't? Like, there's a lot of people that she may be the first figure that they buy for the line. That's something we always think about, and it's hard. Because how do we create products that are going to appeal to someone that's been with the line since day one and someone who's brand new? Somebody that just wants to open it up and put it on a shelf as is versus someone that's buying it for the assembly of parts and they're going to tear it apart and use it for customs. There are so many different aspects of the way people approach this line, and we absolutely consider all of that when we put these things together. It's just in a real world, it's not going to hit exactly the same for every single person. There's going to be some times where you have to say, well, I'd love to do this. It just doesn't make sense for this particular release. So we're going to have to do this instead.
Yeah, it's almost like your version of there always has to be a Spider-Man. There always has to be a John Cena. There always has to be a Batman. They always have to have those on the shelves because there's always someone that this is their first opportunity to get that, and they need to be able to get that, whatever that is in a toy line.
And we're pretty good about that. We don't even, like because we don't have a story that everyone's intimately familiar with, we don't have a Wolverine that's got to go in every single, line we put out. But I mean, if you look at the diversity of character types and everything that are in the line, it's actually pretty incredible. And the fact that we don't have those stalwarts that have to be in has allowed us to do that.
And I think that's probably more for maybe the next time we're on Mythic Conversations, but I'd be interested in, as the story becomes more robust and more mature, and you start to have characters that people must have in their collection because they are now the Wolverine, not because they're cool or rare, right? But because they are. I'd be interested, and I think that's more for your show down the road, because I think that's an interesting conversation. But so I mean, we're going to wrap up, and Jeremy's got a lot of work to do coming up this week, and all the things we'll wrap up with the IshCon. But that's, I think there's a lot of good in here of the setting the kind of the guidelines for yourself. The never spend bill money on toys. That should be on shirts for all of us. But then also, I think the playing with your toys is an important thing that I'm trying to do more of in the last. I mean, right in front of me, I bought that diorama at Joe Fest that's sitting right here. It's way too big. It's bigger than I thought it was, and I have no idea what I'm going to do with it. But I'm going to take some good pictures with it here coming up.
Yep.
Taking pictures, messing around with it, because I think for me, and just speaking for me, I want to stop being what do you do with your toys? Oh, I acquire them. And that kind of, and then I stick it on a shelf, and then I haven't touched it in 4 years. Like, it's really easy to fall into that trap.
Yep.
I want to appreciate them more and change them up and do things. So I've done a lot of organization to make it easier to get to the heads and change out the things. I think playing with the toys will help rein in some of the potential negative parts of the hobby, maybe overspending or not appreciating it as much, or whatever the case may be. And you've been a big influence on that. I know if folks go on your channel, which is tagged in the description here, and you go back to a lot of Jeremy's customizing videos, I think many people have said, but they are really helpful at just the simple way to start messing around. And I imagine, you're speaking directly to Legion, but the same things he talks about, you could do to whatever it is you collect.
Sure.
You could pan a line of Spider-Man and get web lines if you want to, whatever you want to do. It's the same applicable lessons, I think.
Yeah, I think if you play, because for me, playing with toys has really made me realize what I want to continue collecting. When you get a toy, tear it open, pose it, put it on a shelf, and as you just said, never think about it again. That's not as much fun as a figure that I want to handle. I want to play around. I want to swap things. And I mean, there have been times where I have a custom idea and I go in my collection and I'm like, I got to sacrifice that figure. And so I genuinely am playing with these. For me, that's one of the reasons why, because when I was first collecting Legions, I wasn't as heavy as I am now into the Legions. Obviously I was collecting a lot of stuff back then, more so even than I am now. And the reason that I narrowed in and focused on Legions is every single time I got a figure, I was having fun with it. And that's what this is supposed to be about. Yeah. This is supposed to be about enjoying your hobby and having a good time. So much of what I love is, that nostalgic connection. I had a great childhood. I, loved playing with toys. So this brings me back to that type of feeling that I had when I was a kid in a way that no other line has done since. And we talk about that all the time. Eric and I talk about that. Members of the studio talk about that. The fact that we are intentionally trying to bring that to people is very, very deliberate in our toys. So the fact that I hear people say, I've had so much fun with these toys, I watched your videos and it got me popping and swapping, it got me doing some simple painting. Someone like Matt Stein saying, hey, I started by painting with the dots. Matt's going to be at the Charlie show. I started by painting the dots, and now you look at the stuff that he's putting out there and how great it looks. Hearing testimonials like that really, really touches me. And I think it is why this line continues to attract new people who I hear all the time say, this has now become my primary collecting focus.
And if you are, if it's not a thing you've done, if you haven't, done a lot of that, and you're a person that most of us feed off some positive affirmation. I think there's very few people that don't. I was going to make up an example. I give a direct example because I was just with my sister Kim, and so she's been making these soft goods. And initially, I just tagged her, but now she's just freely posting on her own in the Cabal. And she mentioned, she's like, it's just so nice to share something that I know isn't necessarily like where it will be or where it could be, but all these positive comments and all these people, and for all of the ups and downs of social media, one thing I will say in the Cabal, if you post your creation, you're going to get a bunch of people tell you, good job. It's awesome. It's fun. No matter what it is, like, just take a shot. And that is a very affirming place. No different than when you invited your friend over and you had your new toy and you were both excited that you had the new Destro and you sat there and you played with it. You can do that in this community. And, I think that's great. I think it not just, I was thinking when you said some people think about you as the community leader. I actually Jeremy and I talk to each other like 5 or 6 different ways on various social media phone. And I actually think, like, when I message you through a certain account, it's because I'm messaging Jeremy, the community person, versus, oh, we're talking about something that we're doing before Horsemen or whatever. Like, I find it interesting that even I separate that sometimes with that kind of thing. So thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me.
I think it's a fun conversation. We'll look forward. So next week in Michigan, that's Saturday, right? Next week.
So it's Friday and Saturday, StatueCon. Mike and Brad are going to be there July 12th and July 13th. And again, that's Collector Zone in St. Joseph, Michigan.
There will be product there. And then Saturday, the 20th, at Stone Mountain, it's Atlanta. It's about 20 minutes outside of Atlanta proper. A number of folks are coming to that as well. I'm actually surprised at how many people are coming from out of town. That is just going to be a big, it's going to be like a community pizza party. Like, it's a fun time. And then IshCon, which certainly, speaking as someone who was at the last Cosmic event, it was a lot of fun. We got to see the prototypes and stuff. It was 219 degrees in that room. I think make sure there's air conditioning in the room that we are in for that one. But that is going to be a great time. And then, of course, I'm sure whether on my channel, your channel, somebody's channel, we'll be talking about as we get to Legions Con later in the year.
Well, you and I will catch up after IshCon. I'm sure we'll be on Mythic Conversations. We'll talk about the new wave. We'll talk about IshCon, and then I'm sure we'll be talking in the lead up to Legions Con, because I just posted yesterday, 18 weeks. We're 18 weeks away from the doors throwing open on Legions Con. Well, I mean, this time, 18 weeks from now, Legions Con Day 2 will be done, and we'll be starting to think about next year. But it's a long way to go.
You're probably already thinking about Legions Con next year in the depending on your hat.
A little bit. I mean, really, we're so focused. There's still a bunch to get done for this year.
Big year, the anniversary year.
Yeah, we're still just so focused on this year. It'll be a little bit from now before I'm feeling more comfortable where I can start focusing on 2025.
Well, all of that we look forward to. I will see you in a couple weeks in North Carolina.
Absolutely.
And everybody in chat, thanks for joining. Seth is in the chat, so I will announce next Sunday, Seth's going to join me. Again, I said he's driving up from South Florida to come to IshCon. He's going to join me, and we're going to talk about the same kind of things with him. Thanks, everybody. We will see you. I don't know. I've got a bunch of videos coming up in one of those. See you next time.